All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining our virtual town hall today. My name is Carlos Rosales. I'm CCC's Community Engagement and Outreach Associate here, and I'm excited to be joined by a number of great speakers who are going to be talking to you about different issues related both on the census and redistricting, as well as voting and what you need to know to be able to register and to vote in this upcoming election. Um, Once again, we are going to be streaming this live on Facebook, and all attendees right now have their screens turned off and are muted. So if at any time you are experiencing any technical difficulties or have a question for one of our speakers and panelists, by all means, please submit those questions under the Q&A box that you see on your menu or in your chat. And I'll be able to make sure that those questions are facilitated to our speakers when we get to our Q&A portion. We are joined by a number of 5 different speakers. The first that you'll be hearing from will be Jeff M. Weiss, who is an adjunct professor and senior fellow at the New York Law School, where he directs the New York Census and Redistricting Institute, and also serves as an advisor to the New York Counts 2020 Coalition. Next, followed by Jeffrey, you'll hear from Olivia Brady, who is the Youth Engagement Coordinator for NYC Votes at the New York City Campaign Board. And then lastly, you'll be hearing from members of CCC's Youth Action Program, Christian, Aiden, and Alexandra. CCC for many years now has been conducting after-school programming for high school students interested in advocating on issues on behalf of themselves, their schools, and their community. And they're here to talk to you a little bit about their own efforts as well for this current program year and what they have in store during the 2020 elections. So without further ado, I'm going to be now passing it off to Jeffrey, who's going to be sharing a little bit about the 2020 census and beyond, specifically focusing on redistricting in New York State. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Okay, well, if I'm on camera, good afternoon, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon to talk about redistricting, what happens after the census. And before I share a PowerPoint that will give you a 30,000-foot overview of the New York State redistricting process, I'll just mention that today being October 6th gives us till the end of October to complete the census. I say that just being mindful that a federal district court judge in California extended the census count by court order through the end of the month. But we're going to know tomorrow, Wednesday, by 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time, whether a federal appeals court will stay or lift the judge's order. And of course, if the court does lift the stay, or if the court keeps the stay and it continues the census to October 31st, we can expect the an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, I'm going to now switch over to my PowerPoint, so I'll have to do a little bit of mechanics here and share a screen. See, I'm just switching over now and blow this up a bit. Okay, hopefully, Carlos, if you can just confirm, you can shake your head up and down. Okay, I see. Okay, and let me close out all these little photos here. Okay, I'm going to take the next about 20 minutes and give you a very quick run through of redistricting, the process mandated by the Constitution, where congressional, state legislative, and city council lines all get redrawn every 10 years. We start with Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. That requires that the Congress be reapportioned every 10 years, or that the lines get redrawn. Since 1790, when the Constitution went into effect, the census has also been used for driving billions of dollars of federal funding for health, transportation, education, community services, infrastructure, you name it. So the last thing I'll say more or less about census is that if you haven't responded yet, or if you know someone who hasn't responded yet, please urge them to answer 10 questions. It takes 10 minutes. And now more than ever, the census counts. Advance my slide. So here, just on the funding, to give you an idea of how much money is at stake here, over 300 programs are driven by census data. That's why it's so important to count everybody. Of those 300 plus programs, for 16 major programs alone, New York receives about $53 billion per person. And that breaks down to $2,687 per person for these 16 programs. That includes education funds, Title I, Medicare, Medicaid, Section 8 housing, those programs where each of us as a New Yorker receives a commensurate amount of money. Now, on to the importance of redistricting and reapportionment. During World War II, New York State had 45 members representatives. Now the state only has 27 members in the House. That's the same number we had in the 1820s. So we've gone from 27 to 45 down to 27. We're now projected to lose at least one district because some states gain population, other states stay the same as New York or lose population. But with an undercount, with an incomplete census, New York can lose up to 2 districts. Now I'll spend the rest of my time talking about redistricting, something that is extremely important, but highly either misunderstood or people don't know about it. So I'm going to take this opportunity to try to tell you as much as I can in as little time as possible. We have reapportionment comes first. Reapportionment, sorry about that. Reapportionment is the reallocation of congressional districts to the 50 states. There are 435 congressional districts. Based on a formula in statute, each state gets 1 district, and then districts 51 to 435 are assigned to each state based on their population. That's reapportionment. That's a very quick process. Redistricting is the real ball game outside of how many districts New York State gets, because that's how the actual lines, the boundaries are drawn in each of the boroughs and counties in New York. The average population size now of a congressional district is 717,000 people. For the state Senate, there are 318,000 people. For the state Assembly, 124,000 people. And then for the New York City Council, the populations vary a bit more, but they're between 150 and 160,000 people. Now, things were proceeding on track for reapportionment and redistricting until July 21st, when President Trump directed the Commerce Department, which oversees the Census Bureau, to exclude undocumented non-citizens or illegal aliens, as the president calls them, for congressional reapportionment. In other words, take the number of non-citizens who were here without proper papers, without green cards, and take them out of the state population counts for reapportionment. That's going to hurt some states. The press accounts that I heard on the radio on July 21st, CBS radio, was President has directed the Census Bureau not to count non-citizens. And that put a chilling effect across the country, because if you are an immigrant and you're not here legally, you're not going to want to bother with the census. This is sort of the follow-up to the president's attempt to ask a citizenship question, which the Supreme Court rejected over a year ago. Now, this memorandum that set presidential policy has already been rejected by the New York federal courts. There are other similar challenges pending across the country, but the US Supreme Court will hear this case, the rejection by the federal court in New York, sometime in December. But the president's announcement created chaos and spread misinformation. So when will the census end? As I mentioned, we hope that the count will take place and continue until October 31st. that might get short-circuited tomorrow if a federal court stays or stops the extension, but let's not worry about that yet. Now, when it comes to the redistricting, I'll show you the maps just to give you a sense in New York City of what these districts look like. Of the 150 state assembly districts, we've got about 50 plus in New York City. You can see the boundaries of these districts here. They're somewhat small. For the state Senate, districts are a bit larger because there are only 63 Senate districts as opposed to 150 assembly districts. And here you can see the larger sizes of our current Senate districts. And congressional districts are over 717,000 people. They're much larger. Also, these districts tend to share areas with Nassau County. We have Congressman Meeks, Congressman Swazi, and the 3rd and 5th districts who extend into Nassau County. So when you get down to what do you do? How do you draw the lines? What governs the process? First off, we've got the US Constitution's one person, one vote population equality requirement. And that means that each congressional district, each legislative district must be basically equal in population from one district to the other. The Federal Voting Rights Act is a second factor that guarantees that in areas where you have extremely polarized, racially polarized voting, where African American, where Latinx, where Asian Americans cannot get elected to office, so the communities can't pick their candidates, where the white community basically outvotes them, the Voting Rights Act kicks in. For most other criteria, rules, procedures, processes, the New York State Constitution, which I'll get into in a bit more depth, and it was amended in 2014 to create a new process, will govern state and congressional redistricting. And I probably won't get a chance to mention it, but the New York City Charter governs the City Council redistricting, and that will take place before 2023 elections. The congressional and state legislative redistricting takes place before the 2022 elections. So what are the tools we use? Well, the state receives block level census data. That's equivalent, for those of you familiar with voting in New York, the size of an election district where you vote at a poll place, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people. And the data includes information by race, ethnicity, and voting age. The people who draw the lines in the legislature have high-speed software that uploads the data and enables the lines to be drawn. You can look at the data, you can look at the map, and the district boundaries are created. In New York State, there's an office called LAT4, the Legislative Advisory Task Force on Reapportionment, that does the work for the legislature, and also a new commission, which I'll get into, which is actually meeting for the second time tomorrow, will be drawing draft plans for the legislature. When lines are drawn, you have to follow, as I mentioned, population equality, one person, one vote, compactness, that districts are relatively round or square or rectangular. They not be a 55-sided edge monstrosity. We also keep communities of interest intact, communities of like-minded socioeconomic or educational interests. Often, this is more the case outside New York City. You'll follow jurisdictional boundaries. You don't want to divide towns or cities or villages too much. And also, there are factors that the law allows for incumbency, not to pair two members of the Assembly or the Senate together in one district, or to also look at the cores of the existing current districts. We have a commission now. The voters in New York approved a constitutional amendment in 2014 that created a 10-member commission. Speaker Carl Hastie has 2 appointments. You see here, Elaine Frazier, an Albany veteran, Eugene Benger, a Manhattan attorney. Senate President Andrea Stewart-Cousins appointed Dr. John Flateau, a very experienced redistrictor and professor at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn, and David Imamura, an attorney at a Manhattan law firm. In the Senate, in the Republican minority sides, the Senate Minority Leader, Robert Ort, appointed a former legislator, George Winter, and a former state senator from Nassau County, Jack Martins. And in the Assembly, the minority leader appointed Charles Nesbitt, a former member from upstate New York, and Keith Wofford from New York City, an attorney who ran for Attorney General in 2018. These 8 members met last week for the first time to pick 2 additional members who are independent. Dr. Ivelisse Cuevas Molina, a political science professor at Fordham University, and Ross Brady, a Brooklyn attorney who is the administrator at Union Temple in Brooklyn. Now, how will this new commission work? Well, they've got the membership. I just explained that. This commission is going to need to undertake a robust outreach effort and engage the public. Those of you watching this this webinar on how these lines should be drawn. They've got to follow the criteria that I mentioned a few slides back, and also the process involves permitting the commission to draw one set of congressional and state legislative maps and to submit to the legislature for approval. And if the legislature rejects that first set of maps, the commission goes back and can submit a second set of maps. Either way, the governor must approve or veto the maps as he would with any bill. And the major difference between what will happen next year and in the past was that in previous cycles, the legislature itself drew the lines without using outside non-legislative members. The commission was set to not permit legislators to draw their own lines and pick their own voters, but to have outside people recommend the lines instead. Now, the commissioners still have yet to select one member as chair. The legislature appropriated $750,000 for the commission to operate through March 31st of next year, and there'll be more funds appropriated next year's April 1st budget. The commission has yet to hire staff, which includes 2 co-executive directors. Now here we get to the small print. I'm going to show you some of the dates. I'll just go through this quickly, and hopefully, Carlos can make these slides available to you later to look at. But right now, the data arrives in New York for the purposes of line drawing. Oops. Let's see. The data arrives by April 1st of next year. There is the possibility, because of this pending court action extending the census until October, that the Census Bureau will need more time to digest, analyze, and crunch the data, so that might push off the delivery of the data to the state until July 31st. Before the commission approves its plans, they've got to hold 12 hearings throughout the state. You can see I last used this PowerPoint in Queens, but there will be a hearing in each of the city's 5 boroughs, as well as in Nassau, Suffolk, Rockland, Westchester counties, as well as the upstate major cities. The commission is going to need to publicize their hearings well in advance and literally make everything public as possible. That these hearings also have to take place next summer, no later than September 15th. Now, because the state has moved the fall primary up to the spring, this whole schedule is being changed next year for redistricting. There is a pending constitutional amendment which would change the deadline to earlier dates, but just figure that next year, beginning in April or July through December, the New York State redistricting process will be moving forward. There are other kinds of bells and whistles added here, that when the commission develops its plans, the minority parties have to be supportive of the plans to give it some bipartisan cooperation. Right now, the legislature is controlled by the Democrats. That means that one appointee of each of the 4 legislative leaders must approve the commission's draft plans to also give it bipartisan support. And if the commission cannot get 7 members to agree on a plan, the plan or plans that they've worked on with the greatest amount of support will be submitted to the legislature along with the recorded votes, so they can see how the commission tried but couldn't reach a decision. And again, these provisions may be changed by a pending constitutional amendment, which you, the voters, would have a chance to vote on next November, just 2 months before this process goes into effect. The commission has until the end of 2021 to develop and submit its plans, but it could submit its plans as late as January 15th, 2022, if necessary. The legislature can put the congressional and legislative bill in the same package, but that's not required. And then the governor has final say whether to veto or approve the plan. If the legislature rejects the first plan, if it rejects the second plan, on a third try, the legislature can do almost whatever it wants. But again, the governor is required to weigh in on either approve or reject the plan. I just jumped ahead too quickly, but here you can see that there's a Rube Goldberg concoction of voting rules that apply if the legislature is divided between Democrats and Republicans. This amendment was drafted in 2012 when the state Senate was under Republican control and the Assembly was under Democratic control. Looking forward, they put language in here that should one party, as is the case now, the Democrats control both chambers, then various rules apply as to how many votes are needed both in the commission and the legislature to move a plan forward. And again, all of these provisions may be changed by by this amendment that you may vote on next year. Just a quick wrap up things here. After a plan is developed, a challenge could be against the plan in state Supreme Court. That court has to rule within 60 days. If the courts reject a plan, then the legislature can fix them. And one major issue that was left out of the 2014 constitutional amendment was what to do about prison gerrymandering, where in 2010, the state enacted a law that takes prisoners who fill up the populations in upstate rural areas where they don't come from, and those numbers are used to add them to Assembly, Senate, congressional districts to fill out the population numbers. That was seen as a major civil rights issue. So the legislature in 2010 passed a law that reallocates or puts prisoners back in their homes of record before incarceration. That was left out of the 2014 amendment as something that this new commission is going to have to deal with. The constitutional amendment that's pending now would in fact make this permanent by including it in the language of the amendment. I'll just close because we're running short of time, but in New York City, for the city council districts, and those districts must be drawn by 2023. There's another different commission, a city commission is appointed, where the mayor and the city council leaders appoint a commission that will redraw the lines. And I'll save most of that for another presentation well after a year from now. So Carlos, I tried to squeeze as much as I could into my 20 minutes, and we'll be glad to answer questions and answers and make this slide set available to our listeners and viewers. So thank you very much.
Great, fabulous. Thank you, Jeff. That was really informative and insightful information about the redistricting process that has been undertaken and will be unfolding in the coming months and well into next year, I believe. So again, if anyone does have questions, please make sure you enter it into the Q&A or the chat box if you're on Zoom. For those of you who are on Facebook Live, please submit your questions there, and we'll make sure that those questions get brought to us during the Q&A and panel discussion that's going to be happening after these presentations. So next, I'd like to now reintroduce again Olivia Brady, who is the Youth Engagement Coordinator for NYC Votes at the New York City Campaign Board, who will be talking a little bit about what key information you need to know as voters who are getting ready to vote in this upcoming election. She and the folks at NYC Votes also has this campaign called We Power NYC that they're also going to be highlighting and sharing a little bit of information about. So without further ado, Olivia, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Hi, everyone. I'm Olivia Brady. I'm the Youth Engagement Coordinator for NYC Votes at the Campaign Finance Board, like Carlos said. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I just want to introduce our agency and what we do a little bit. So the New York City Campaign Finance Board, we're a city agency, so we're entirely funded by taxpayer dollars. And our primary purpose is to monitor spending in local elections. So we have several offices that are covered that we monitor. And so what we do is we really try to make sure that our local elections are fair, equitable, and transparent. We have a program, which is one of the most progressive matching funds programs in the country, that allows candidates in covered offices who are running to get up to $8 back from the city to help fund their campaigns. And that money can be used for anything from printing off flyers to childcare. We also have a follow the money tool, and you can actually go to our website and see where candidates are taking that money from. But that side of the office works directly with candidates. My side of the office, the NYC Votes side, we work with the public. So as a youth engagement coordinator, I do workshops. I've worked with CCC in the past. Typically I'm in classrooms. Right now I'm on Zoom. But just wanted to give some context for who we are and what we do. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now and just briefly go over some of the key issues you need to know when you're making a plan to vote going into this election. So first things first, let's walk through these deadlines. October 9th, that's this Friday, that's the voter registration deadline. If you have not registered to vote yet, you have two options. If you have a driver's license or a state ID, go to our website, voting.nyc, and you can actually register online through the DMV portal that way. If you do not have a driver's license or a state ID, we had a partnership with TurboVote, but because the deadline's on Friday, I think the quickest thing for you to do is actually print off a voter registration form. And if you just Google New York State voter registration form, you'll find a PDF. Print it off, fill it out, and you'll need to mail it to the Board of Elections. If you don't have a driver's license or state ID and you want to vote on November 3rd, you should definitely take care of that today or tomorrow. Next up, we have the vote by mail deadlines. So you can request your ballot by October 27th. Do not wait until October 27th to do that. However, if you do want to vote by mail, your ballot will not get to you in time. We need to account for the slowness of COVID, right? How that's just slowing things down on top of, some of the issues we've been experiencing with the United States Postal Service. So in order to do that, we just want to give the Board of Elections and the mail plenty of time to get our absentee ballots to us. So you can visit nycabsentee.com to request. And then it just has to be submitted by November 3rd. So you have two options for this, which I will talk about in more detail in a minute, but you can either mail it or take it directly to a polling site. And then we have early voting. So if you'd like to vote in person, but you're worried about the crowds, early voting is a perfect opportunity to do this. So from October 24th to November 1st, hours vary by day, but there's weekend hours, there's late evening hours. So if you have like a weird work schedule, early voting might be a great option for you. Just make sure you visit voting.nyc to double check your poll site, because your early voting site is likely different than your election day site. And then you can always vote on Election Day, November 3rd. We're just shy of a month away now. So again, it's just really important right now to actually think through how you're going to vote. Take a few minutes, sit down, encourage your friends and family to have this conversation, right? How are you actually going to vote? Because there's a lot of factors coming in play, and New Yorkers have more options to vote now than they have before. But I do want to go into just some quick information about, Lauren, I see your question. I actually don't know what the status on the DOE with election sites is, but I would stay posted to the Board of Elections for information on that. But I do just want to go over a strong area of our office is that we have a lot of data about voter turnout. And we use this to see, if our work is actually effective and where we need to be. But I want to talk about voter registration because we're in a crisis. So just to begin with, only 38.4% of eligible young New Yorkers are not represented at the voting booth. So that's almost 40% of young New Yorkers who are not registered to vote, who are otherwise eligible. This might not seem like a lot, but compared to other age groups, You know, age groups like 30 to 39, 60 to 69, et cetera, they're registered between 90 and 100%. So we've got our older neighbors who are voting at way higher rates than our younger voters. And, you know, there are a myriad of factors, right, that prevent young people from registering to vote at the same rate as their older counterparts. But one of the key issues here right now is the pandemic and the lack of online voter registration for New Yorkers without a valid state ID or driver's license. Voter registration compared to this time in 2016, which was also a presidential election year, is down by 49%. This is a huge issue because the data consistently shows that people who do not vote in a presidential year are significantly less likely to vote in any subsequent local or state elections. And with 2021 coming up, where almost every single city office is, running again, we really want to make sure that young people have a stake in that election at that decision-making seat. A few other things to note too is that young people do have the capacity to turn out at high rates in presidential years. But for local elections, we're kind of lagging, right? So we really want to think about how do we get our peers motivated to vote in those off years? And I think 2021 is going to be a great year for getting that going, as long as we can get folks registered to vote. Another thing you'll notice too, which is quite important, is that between 2015 and 2019, the portion of the electorate that's made up of young voters actually increased by quite a bit. It's just really exciting to see that young people are actually getting more involved in the process, at least on the electoral side. And then something else I just want to note, so our office released this data in April, right around the time COVID first hit the city, and areas that were hit hardest by COVID are also some of the neighborhoods that have some of the lowest voter turnout in 2019 for that city election we had. So I think it's important here that this data really acknowledges the way that socioeconomic factors drive the ability to register to vote. And so in order to move forward from this, we need to first acknowledge it and then think about how we can rewrite this script on voter turnout. And if anyone has questions about this data, I'm happy to talk more about it in the Q&A section. And then the voter registration form, I just want to go over a few key points. The basic requirements here, you have to be a US citizen. You can actually pre-register starting at 16. So that means you can fill out your form and it'll get marked as pending until you turn 18 and it gets activated. And you also have to have a mailing address. And the reason I point this out is that although you can register to vote at an impermanent or unofficial address if you are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, you still have to have somewhere where you can get mail. And this is a huge issue that disenfranchises a lot of voters in our city who are otherwise eligible, other than the fact that they're experiencing homelessness, right? So again, just want to make folks aware of this information in case you are doing voter registration at a shelter or another place where your population may be experiencing housing insecurity. It's definitely best to, talk to the organization you're working with or see if there is a roundabout of folks being able to receive mail at a certain address. And then I just want to touch on some of these voting considerations. So New York State recently, a few years ago, expanded voting rights for formerly incarcerated individuals. So if you are on probation, you can vote. And if you're on parole, but you've been pardoned by the governor, you can vote. Again, always check with the Board of Elections and your lawyer to check on your voting status. You will have to reactivate your voter registration. That just means filling out the form again and submitting it. And if you are presently incarcerated on less than a felony charge, you actually can still vote. You can have an absentee ballot sent to you, or if you are incarcerated and awaiting trial or bail, you can actually vote. You can have your absentee ballot sent to your location. And then just another note, survivors of domestic violence can actually seal their public voting record, and Safe Horizon is a great resource to go for help with this. And then again, I just want to reiterate the point that folks who are experiencing homelessness can register with a school or a shelter as their address, but they do have to have somewhere that they can receive mail. And then I'm just going to touch on this vote by mail process and kind of talk about what's going on right now. So in terms of staying COVID safe, I would say that voting by mail is the safest way to vote because you can do it right from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to wait in line, all of that. Governor Cuomo issued an executive order that allows any eligible voter to cast an absentee ballot. And then just remember, it's a two-step process. So you've got to request your form, and then you have to submit your ballot. If you'd like to vote absentee, request your ballot today. The link is nycabsentee.com. It takes like less than a couple minutes. It's super quick and easy. Do it right now if you're thinking about it. And then when you're going through that application, when it gets to the reason box, check temporary illness, that meaning has been expanded to account for all COVID-19 concerns. And then you can have your ballot sent to wherever your present location is, even if it's not the address that you're presently registered at. And again, just make sure you request by October 27th. Again, do not wait until like the day of to do it, right? Do it as soon as you possibly can. Another thing is, if you request an absentee ballot and decide you want to vote in person, that's totally fine. So if you think you might want to have a voting backup plan, definitely request. And if you decide to, vote in person, it's no big deal. You just have to, show up and vote. You don't have to spoil your ballot or anything like that. And then once you get your ballot in the mail, you'll want to check your mailbox frequently for it, follow the instructions super carefully, make sure you sign the back of that envelope, and you actually have two options for submitting. So you can postmark your ballot by November 3rd, and so that means you'll have to provide your own postage and put it in the mail. It doesn't mean put it in the mail at 5 p.m. on November 3rd, right? It means put it in the mail as soon as possible. It doesn't have to get to the Board of Elections by the 3rd, it just has to get stamped by the post office by November 3rd. But I think really the most secure option, if you are interested in voting by mail, is taking your ballot directly to a drop box. So the Board of Elections has these absentee ballot drop boxes. They're very cool. They have like Board of Elections stuff all over them. But they're at any early voting and election day poll site. You can drop it off anywhere. It doesn't even have to be the one you're registered at. So if you're someone who's not working from home anymore and you want to drop your ballot off after or before work, this is a really great option for you. And you don't have to play the worry game of like, did my ballot actually make it in the mail, right? You can take it directly to a poll site and ensure that it is counted. And you have, October 24th to November 3rd to drop it off, so you have some time. And then just a couple of resources that we have as an agency. Voting.nyc is your one-stop shop for every single voting question you could possibly have. You can check your registration. We have links to read our voter guide, which is getting released soon. You can find your poll site, and it's available in over 15 languages. We also have the pledge to vote. The link is right here. And so if you do that, you can actually get text messages or email updates about voting, elections and deadlines. We don't send you a million spam emails just when there's relevant information coming up. So it's a great accountability tool because you can't say, oh, I forgot to register if you're getting a text message reminding you to, right? And then I also offer workshops on voting, civic engagement, and local government. And if you're interested in, having me come to your classroom, virtually, of course, right now, or community center, please let me know. I'm happy to work with y'all on this. And then again, I just want to highlight these deadlines. I recommend adding them to your phone calendar so you can remind yourself and also nag your friends and families about them. But yeah, I know I'm a bit early, but that's kind of all of that information I wanted to share. And I think I also do want to mention too, if you were one of the voters who received an incorrectly printed absentee ballot, it primarily affected voters in Brooklyn, just wait. The Board of Elections is already sending out new ballots. So just wait until you get your new one that is correct. And again, you can submit it via the mail or what I recommend, taking it directly to the poll site. But that is everything I wanted to cover. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much again, Olivia. That's very useful and helpful information as we're getting ready to vote here in New York City and in New York in general. Again, I saw that some folks had questions or raised their hands. So if you did have a question, please put it in the chat. I've already made note of folks who raised their hands. So if you want to speak over audio, I'll call on you when we get to the Q&A session as well. But for our final presentation, we're going to be handing it off now to our CCC youth advocates, starting off with Christian, who is also joined by Aiden and Alexandra. So Christian, go ahead, introduce yourself and take things from here.
Hi, my name is Christian, and thank you for the introduction. So I am currently a junior at the United Nations International School, and we are the Youth Action member program from CCC, and here is our Get Out the Vote campaign by Youth Action New York City.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Tiger, and I'm a junior at Millennium High School. So we can get started. For our campaign, Vote for Youth Voices, we felt like young people are more likely to care about voting and civics when we talk about issues, as opposed to just telling them that it is their duty to vote. So we felt like we wanted to engage young people in a project that focuses on issues as well as the nuts and bolts of voting. We decided to create a voter education guide that would do these two things, designed with youth people in mind. In our guide, we wanted to let young people know how they can register and pre-register to vote and how they can vote in the upcoming election. But we also wanted to educate New Yorkers about the issues that youth in the city care about. So we created a public opinion poll and were able to poll over 500 youth from all 5 boroughs about issues like racism, climate change, gun control, healthcare, and more.
The majority of the voter education guide discusses our findings from the public opinion poll we administered. The idea is that we think it is important for New Yorkers to have a sense of what young people who may or may not be eligible to vote care about. What issues do they worry about? What factors influence their decisions on what political candidates to support or oppose? We did a lot of work with NYC Votes and Community Votes over the last year, both great organizations working to increase voting rates. Through these partnerships, we learned that young voters in New York City turned out at only a rate of 13.5% for the last mayoral election. Something that is hopeful though is that among 18 to 29-year-olds nationally, voter turnout went from 20% in 2014 to 36% in 2018, a pretty big jump. So we think now is the time to keep the momentum going. This is why we decided to create a voter guide for young New Yorkers to mobilize and energize them to get out and vote. We are encouraging people to vote in the interests of young people who are the future. We are hoping this publication will energize young people and their allies, and readers can also find all the information they need to cast their ballot right here in the guide as well.
There are 506 survey respondents from the ages of 14 to 24 who live in the 5 boroughs. The results were representative of different demographics of race, household incomes, and gender identity. Our guide is available for free, and I'll put it in the chat.
So this is a page from our election guide that has our findings on racism and other forms of discrimination. So as you can see on the right, that over 50% of respondents felt that they have been discriminated on for their race and consider racism an issue as a top priority in their decisions about which political candidate they support or oppose. So on the left is a quote from an anonymous survey participant who describes how her life has been appended by racism and injustice. And the quote says, "I fear that I'm not safe in the eyes of the government or the law because the people who have vowed to serve my people are killing us. All my life, I've seen racist people get away with committing crimes against people who look like me. It has prompted me to advocate for African American rights and speak out against injustices towards Black people." So here are some of the findings on economic inequality. You can see that the vast majority of youth don't believe that a minimum wage is adequate to meet the needs of families in New York City. And we can also see that economic inequality is an issue that the youth worry about at high rates. So the quote on the right shows how gentrification can precipitate economic inequality and make the matter of living in New York City a daily and endless struggle. And the quote says, "The gentrification of my community in Brooklyn has increased the price of rent and basic necessities. Nowadays, it's harder to make ends meet with a minimum wage pay rate. My family lives paycheck to paycheck."
This is some information we gathered about educational equity from our survey. Over 35% of the youth surveyed are worried about educational equity. We also found that over 35% of the youth polled felt that educational equity is a top priority in which candidate they choose to support or oppose. The quote to the left says, "It feels terrible being the only person of ethnicity in a classroom. Like you're an outsider, and at least for me, it makes it harder to connect with people because it feels like I studied and worked to where I am, whereas others are at the same place that I am due to their household income." So I feel like this quote shows how a minority student feels at a school dominated by another race and how they're feeling disenfranchised. This is some more information we gathered on healthcare from our survey. Roughly 36% of people said that they strongly agree that healthcare is a top priority in their decision to support or oppose a candidate. So we really see how important healthcare is to the youth that we surveyed. The quote to the right says, "In my community, lots of teens suffer because we struggle. Us being kids should not have to struggle not knowing whether light bills are paid, whether we should be scared of getting shot. We are always scared, and that affects our mindset and health." This quote demonstrates how some youth in New York City are worried about their economic status and their safety, and how that is constantly affecting their mental health.
So for our guide, we also collected data on climate change, and we can see that a large glaring percentage of those surveyed say that they worry about climate change and it is a top priority in their decisions of who to support or oppose. And the quote on the left says, climate change can affect my life personally because I know that if we continue to neglect our duties in keeping the environment safe, the world and its resources will decline.
These are some of the findings from gun control. Over 80% of the youth we surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that there should be stricter gun laws. Whether young people are afraid of gun violence in their schools or communities, the fear is very real for youth in New York City. 65% of New York City youth reported that they do not believe that the government is taking effective action in preventing gun violence. Some believe that the country must do more than just enact stricter gun laws. The quote says, "I believe that children should not have to live in fear of being killed in their schools. However, I doubt that stricter gun control will solve the issue in the long run. Violence will still occur regardless of whether the weapon used is a gun or not. The government should not focus entirely on gun control, but the issue behind these violent acts." This quote shows the lack of confidence youth have in government solving this issue, and that they are looking for solutions beyond just gun control, but preventing the causation of the acts before they happen. These are the results of the police reform issue. Almost 50% of respondents believe that the police in their community unfairly target people of color, with a majority sometimes or more frequently worrying about safety in their community. The quote says, "I want police officers to not abuse their power or unnecessarily target people of color. I'm concerned about police officers having quotas to meet because usually they target a certain group." This quote shows a fear of many youth of police officers abusing their power. This issue has caused many youth to join BLM protests around the city. We also created a Get Out the Vote toolkit for anyone who wants to help spread the word about registering and voting in 2020. This toolkit provides things you can post on social media, a text out the count, and the youth opinion poll. These are sample social media posts provided in the toolkit. The other images you are seeing in this presentation are also included in the toolkit.
So just to say a bit about why it is important to vote. By voting, you are keeping democracy alive. You are doing a service not only for yourself, but for your community. You are making sure that you are heard and represented. These days, we know it is hard, dealing with a global health crisis, economic insecurity, and much more, which is precisely why your vote matters. The vote is a form of expression in America that our founding fathers fought to have. You should vote for your own interests, because if you won't vote for your own interests, nobody else will. So let's talk about how to vote this year.
So first we need to talk about registration. To register to vote, you must be a citizen of the United States and live in the state and country you plan to vote in for at least 30 days before Election Day. There are some restrictions on voting for people with felony convictions. You also must be at least 18 years old to vote in the 2020 presidential election. However, New York recently passed a law that 16, 17-year-olds can pre-register, so that when you turn 18, you'll automatically receive your voter registration card without having to register again. It gives young people something to look forward to as they patiently wait to exercise their right to vote. There are several ways that people can register. Something very easy to do is go to registertovote.org with the number 2. That's registertovote.org, again, with the number 2. So this site will walk you through the process and mail you an already filled out registration form in a pre-stamped envelope. You just have to sign it and mail it back. You can also download a registration form and mail it back yourself, or bring it to your voter registration center to drop it off in person. So more information on how to register can be found in our hashtag Vote for Youth Voices education guide for young people and their allies. And remember that every eligible citizen of the United States should be registered to vote for the 2020 election, especially young people 16 and up. And the deadline to register in New York is October 9th.
This year, anyone can register and request an absentee ballot due to COVID-19 concerns by October 27th. You will receive your ballot in the mail and must mail it back by November 3rd. If you prefer to vote in person but want to avoid the crowds, New York now has early voting. You can vote starting on Saturday, October 24th through Sunday, November 1st. You can look up your early voting polling place online. We have more detailed instructions on this in our Youth Voices Voter Education Guide. And if you procrastinated on all of the above, be safe on Election Day. Polling places may be crowded, so wear a mask and bring something to keep yourself busy if you have to stand in line. And don't forget to thank your poll workers who will guide you through the steps of voting in person while you are there.
Check the toolkit for further details, and you can share it and the voter guide with everyone you know and spread the word.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you again so much, Christian, Aiden, and Alexandra, both for all the work leading up into designing and implementing the survey, as well as this campaign that you and the Youth Action members are moving forward, so that way youth are mobilized and active for this election cycle. So now, I know we have a couple of questions, but we're going to be moving on to the panel and Q&A component of this event. I'm going to be starting off with one question I prepared for the panelists. And then during that time, please, for folks who are on Facebook or on Zoom, submit your questions via chat or the Q&A or in your Facebook feed. And you can also raise your hand. I already have a number of questions and folks who did so prior to this session, so I'll be sure to call on you. But for whatever reason, if I miss you, don't hesitate to remind me on the chat box. So moving on, and I think this is a question for all panelists, so feel free to step in and speak if you'd like to. But the question that I want to start us off with is a question relating to this heightened degree of public or mainstream awareness about all these different issues that you spoke about. When we talk about the census, and now that we're going into redistricting, voting, and voter mobilization, my question for all of you is, what do you think are the opportunities you see during this time with increased awareness? And what might be some of the challenges constituents or voters might need to be made aware of that might not be on their radars at all?
Do you want to call on us in order, or should I start?
Anyone can start, but go right ahead.
I'll suggest that that census and redistricting are part of the bedrock of our democracy. Essentially, the numbers that are gathered by the Census Bureau this year will determine the population bases of districts that will guide public policy through the next 10 years. That if you care about schools, hospitals, infrastructure, senior citizens services, food stamps, literally any program, the elected officials make those decisions, and who they represent, who elects them, are all based on the census first and redistricting second. So the opportunity to participate in the process, to let public officials know how you feel about who represents you in Albany and Washington, will all be taken up by this commission next year. And as I mentioned, this will all be publicized. It will be out there in the media. So if you care who your representatives are, this will time next year to testify, to organize, to look at suggesting maps based on much more media that'll be available to you next year. So it's a once in a decade opportunity, as is the census, to get involved in who represents you in our capitals.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Olivia, how about you? What opportunities are you seeing during this moment, and what should voters or those preparing to participate in this election season keep in mind as they move forward with this process?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to touch on here, right? So, first of all, voter registration has slowed because of the pandemic, because we have to social distance, right? But I also think this is a moment where a lot of young people are coming together and utilizing social media, utilizing town halls like we're doing tonight, right, to really get vital information out. And people are listening because they're at home, right? They're on Zoom, they're on their phones. I have a group of about 20 youth ambassadors, the We Power NYC ambassadors, and they've all been sharing information on their social media, right? We work together, they get trained on how to make an effective post, all of that. And, they've actually been able to register quite a few of their friends. So I think utilizing that peer-to-peer communication through social media is really key right now. I think the other thing, just generally speaking, is that we have 3 options for voting. That's more than New Yorkers have ever had, right? We can vote absentee, we can vote early in person, or we can vote on election day. But with that, also comes the struggle of making a voting plan, right? So it is a great opportunity, and I think it's really important for all of us to, recognize that we do have these many options and really just take time to think about how we're going to vote and make a plan to do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Aiden, Christian, or Alexandra, do you have any insights on opportunities you see, especially for young people during this moment where there's been, and not only in the last month or so, but really over the last 6-7 months, starting with the pandemic and the movement for racial equity, and now transitioning to voting and elections and census as well. How do you see young people stepping up and taking opportunities during this moment to make sure that their voice matters, especially in the election?
I think that during this time, we've never needed, especially as kids in New York, and young adults in New York, we've never needed or looked to our leaders in a way that we have been doing during these past 6 months. At least I never have. And I really realize how important it is that we have good leaders in our government, and our local government, our federal government, our state government. I think everybody is realizing during a time like this how the people you put in office actually affect your day-to-day life. They can affect your health. I don't think we've ever seen that correlation before. So I think people are becoming hyper aware of voting and how important it is to put the right people in office, and they're getting more passionate about it.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I want to get to a question that was raised by someone in the audience. Chris asked that, a comment that he'd love to get this youth voter registration going out in Staten Island and increasing voter registration for young people there. I think I'll start with you, anyone from CCC's Youth Action, and then Olivia, feel free to chime in as well. But what are your recommendations to get this out in Staten Island? One, the resources of this campaign, and two, engaging youth living in a borough that has different needs compared to other boroughs here in New York City.
Well, I guess I'll start, because for me, it always seemed growing up that voting was kind of a taboo subject. It's not as tangible and as cool as, getting your license and being able to drive. So a lot of people I know, they're kind of in that quagmire where they think that geography determines their political destiny and their political fate. So I think one of the more important things we have to do is kind of try to find ways where we can shift that mindset that one vote, doesn't count, and try to turn that mindset into saying that that your vote is symbolic, that your vote is actually one of the prime vessels to get your voice heard and to get represented. And I guess just even having that good and encouraging mindset can be contagious and can signify to others that because you're voting, others can vote. And it's really an activity that does have tangible results and that will result in the change of the current status quo.
Thank you. And Olivia, can you let us know a little bit about specific efforts to engage young people and get them to register and vote?
Yeah, so I can't speak to any sort of specifics that are going on in Staten Island, but one of our volunteers actually lives and works out there. And if you're interested in doing work with her out there, please send me an email. It's obrady@nyccfb, and I can connect you. They are doing voter registration every weekend, but I would say in general, if you're interested in getting your own thing going, you just need a stack of forms, some clipboards and pens, right? And so just make sure that you're social distancing and being careful, but really go door to door in your neighborhood. If you have a good relationship with the folks in your apartment building, knock on doors, pass out, forms. Voter registration is something that I love doing because I think it's really the easiest way to start getting involved. It's a very tangible thing you can do, right? You can physically register someone to vote. And I think it's a great starting point, especially for young people who are looking to get more involved in their communities. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to add something else. If you want to get the more technical aspects of just voting, we also have a Vote for Youth Voices toolkit that was kind of specifically groomed for this question. And in this toolkit, we have all the nitty-gritty details about voting, what you should do, the facts, and I guess just kind of the issues that matter to New Yorkers. And it's really a great way to kind of see everything and kind of acts as a planner on how to vote and just gives you a whole general idea of what the voting landscape looks like right now.
Great. Thank you, Olivia and Christian. So my next question is going to be for Jeff, and then I'm going to ask another question from the audience after that. So Jeff, the question I have for you is, when thinking about redistricting, I think, or I feel that people often think about the negative ways the process is used and can diminish a community's political power. Can you tell us a little bit about how redistricting can strengthen a person or a community's right to exercise their vote or political representation if they cannot vote?
Okay, I'm muted now. That's a good question. Up until 2012, the redistricting was done by the legislature, where the elected officials essentially drew their own districts for themselves. By using a somewhat independent outside commission to recommend plans to the legislature, the public can come in and suggest, recommend different ways to draw the lines to better reflect communities of interest. We've seen in various parts of New York, I'll mention Queens as an example, where a while back, the Asian American community in Flushing and in Southeast Queens was divided into 8 different assembly districts. You could draw a district that enfranchises, that strengthens the Asian American community to elect its own preferred candidate in 1 or 2 districts, not necessarily 8 districts. So when the commission next year goes out and holds hearings and solicits input, there's more opportunity than there might have been in the past to impact the process.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So our next question from the audience comes from Nancy, and hopefully Olivia, you'll be able to help us out with this one. But Nancy asks, relating to the drop boxes where absentee ballots can be placed, can anyone drop it in those boxes? Maybe you can give us a little insight onto these drop boxes and what that is.
Yeah, I think that is a great question. So the Board of Elections has these drop boxes at every single early voting and election day site. If you go to the NYC Votes Instagram or the Board of Elections Instagram, so it's at NYC Votes or at BOE NYC, they have photos of what they look like. So when you go, you can skip the line and just drop your absentee ballot right in. But you actually can take other people's for them. So, if you have a household of multiple voters who voted absentee, or you have a good relationship with your neighbors, or want to help out maybe some of your elderly neighbors who are really nervous about going out into public right now, right? You can, with their full consent, you can drop anyone's absentee ballot off for them. And it's a great way to actually mobilize and support your community right now.
Great, thank you so much. And hopefully, Nancy, we answered your question. If not, just type in the chat box a clarifying question if we didn't get to your point. So my next question I have is, again, I'll stick with you, Olivia, for this one. So last week, we know that news emerged about errors with absentee ballots being mailed to voters here in New York City. So my question for you is, what do people know so that they can vote, especially in the instance where they received a ballot with an error, and also feel confident in using the voting method?
Yeah, I know this is a super, super important question. And I think the main thing to take away is that, one, the Board of Elections is already correcting this issue. So voters who received a misprinted ballot last week have already received a correct one. I should also clarify as well what the exact issue was. So when you get your absentee ballot, it comes in a big envelope, and then there's a smaller envelope inside of that. And that's actually what you return your ballot in. And so the issue was that that voters had received return ballots, or return envelopes rather, that had the names and addresses of other people on them, or just incorrectly spelled, etc., things like that. And so if that happened to you, do call the Board of Elections. Make sure you're following up. And the second thing is the Board of Elections is immediately, like, they know who received incorrect ballots and they're already resetting them out. So when you get your ballot, and again, this issue primarily affected voters in Brooklyn and Long Island, it looks like, but always, always, always double check, right? So double check to make sure that your return envelope has your correct name and address. And if you are no longer comfortable voting absentee, if this is an issue you encountered, that's okay. You can still go vote in person, even if you requested and received an absentee ballot. I would also say, just to sort of like reassure anyone who's a little bit concerned about this process, that, our vote by mail system has been around since the Civil War. And it's a crucial staple of our democracy to making sure that everyone can vote, particularly senior citizens and particularly disabled folks, right? People who can't physically get to the poll site, students as well. So again, the absentee voting process is very secure. If you are nervous about it, again, I would recommend taking your ballot directly to the election day site. And if anyone has any other questions about this issue, please feel free to ask your question in the chat or in the Facebook Live comments.
Great, thank you. And Olivia, actually one more question for you. Since this was mentioned earlier in the chat, I just wanted to get it out there. So Lauren asked, basically about if we know yet if DOE schools will be used as early voting locations. Can you talk a little bit about that, or where people can find information?
Yes, so I can't actually speak to whether or not the DOE is being used as early voting locations yet, but you can view your early voting site and your election day site. If you go to voting.nyc, you'll find a link that says where to vote, and you'll just click on that and it'll take you directly to a poll site locator, so you can look up and see where your location is. Again, I would follow the Board of Elections and NYC Votes for updates on what's going on with the schools and early voting.
Great, thank you. So now I have, my next question is, again, for all three of the panelists, feel free to jump in with this in any order. And that question is, what impact do these different processes that we talk about here, voting, voter engagement, and redistricting, what impact do these different processes have on people who do not vote? And I'm thinking about, children under 18 or young children, non-naturalized citizens, or individuals who haven't even registered to vote. What's the impact that happens on them?
I'll mention that regardless of your status as a citizen, non-citizen, whether you are a child, whether you are an adult, whether you're a senior, the people that are elected to represent you in the state capitol, Washington, and City Hall represent everybody. And it's very important to mention that the district populations that are used to draw the lines include everybody from infancy to seniors. There was an effort a few years back in Texas to draw lines, district lines, based on people 18 or over, or only based on registered voters. And we did some analysis and discovered that there are 3 times as many children under 18 living in Brooklyn as there are in Manhattan. So just to think, if we didn't count everybody for redistricting, and that Manhattan, if you took children out of the line drawing process, that Manhattan could have much more voting power in Albany and Washington City Hall than could Brooklyn. So everybody counts in the census, everybody counts in redistricting, and whether you are, again, a citizen or non-citizen, everybody has access to their elected officials whose lines get drawn and who represent you.
Great. Olivia, or CCC Youth Action members?
I guess I'll add on. So I think like people who are able to vote, they are privileged in the sense that they have a vessel for change that people who are non-naturalized citizens and undocumented immigrants don't. And there are just so many things that like how your actions could impact, improve the quality of life of others. There's just a plenitude of things that really can't be described in a short response. But, I think in conclusion is that I think the ideals of America is to make life accessible, not just to you, but for everyone. And I think by voting and voting with others in mind, especially, you are kind of keeping America alive, because those people who aren't even represented, they still act as the lifeline of America.
Great, thank you, Christian. So I'll actually stick with the youth action members for this next question that we have. The question is, there's often this narrative that young people are apathetic and turn out less during the elections. My question for our youth action members here is, what do you think it takes to get young people invested in our democracy so that they turn out to vote? And what role do you see young people playing in this election season towards their peers or their communities and the people that surround their own lives?
I think it would actually take something I hope we see a big youth voter turnout in this election, because I think it will take these series of events that have happened in the past 6 to 7 months to probably trigger something in everybody in the country, not just young people, but everybody who didn't vote in the last or previous election. And I think we've been shown that, like I said before, the people in power matter more than ever. And I realized through this past year that it actually matters. Your local politicians, your state politicians, your federal politicians, they actually all matter. They will affect you. It does matter where you live and who you vote in. So I think this is going to increase the voter turnout.
I think another way that we can get youth more invested in democracy is by educating them on issues that connect to their lives personally, because I feel like a lot of youth feel that politics are very far away from their lives on a personal level, and that politics doesn't affect them. But if we explain, the exact issues that affect them on the day-to-day life, that would give them more of an incentive to vote and to support a specific candidate that calls attention to the issues that they care about.
Great, thank you to the both of you for those responses. So I just want to say that we have a few more minutes remaining for this town hall. So if any of our, anyone on Zoom or anyone on Facebook has any more questions, please send them our way now. We'll probably have an opportunity to do one or two more. In the meantime, I have a question again to all panelists here. And what would you say is something people can do today to act on these issues raised, or to engage their communities to get out the vote?
I think just like a couple really easy things that people can do right away. The first is obviously register to vote or help your friends register. You all sat on this webinar, so you know what the process looks like, and you can help other people do that. The next thing would be to fill out your census if you haven't already. And then the last thing that I think is something super easy is calling your elected officials. There's so many issues on the table right now, especially related to COVID. If there's one in particular you're concerned about, you can very easily Google and find a local group that has a script ready and a list of like who your officials are that you can call about regarding issues. I'm thinking specifically about like the eviction moratorium, stimulus checks at the federal level. There's a lot of things going on right now. If you're concerned about the instability, about what's happening with in-person education right now, there's a lot of things, and calling or writing to your elected officials is a very easy step you can take to get involved in that process.
Another thing you can do is just, I mean, this is the best time in history. You'd rather be in no other time than now if you want to access as many voices as you can. So use social media. It's a special thing that kids who are 15, 16, 17 have access to 1,000 people, whether it's from Instagram, Twitter, or Snapchat. So you can do it. You can do posts on social media. The CCC and my peers did a social media takeover for the census, and we helped raise awareness for that, and we plan to do the same with the election. So that's a really easy thing to do.
And I also want to add on, I think like in the Youth Action Member Program, we went to Albany one time, and I think that experience was really enlightening because for a lot of these legislators and lawmakers, they can feel kind of detached of who they're representing. Like they sit in the office in Albany, and we're slaving away in New York City, miles away. So I think just by kind of just showing up there, showing up at where these lawmakers are, joining protests, and kind of just humanizing your voice and humanizing your representation is one of the most imperative things that we can do right now.
Great. Thank you, Christian. And Jeff, I know you've mentioned this in your presentation. Can you just briefly remind folks of, again, the situation with the census and where folks can go to complete it? You're muted, Jeff.
Okay, sorry about that. The census count will continue until October 31st, barring any further court action. So if you haven't responded to the census yet, you can go online, you can use the telephone, or if you have a paper form, you can send that back. If you don't do any of those things, and you haven't heard from the Census Bureau, an enumerator might knock on your door, but I wouldn't count on it. So the key thing to do is to self-respond by yourself right away.
Great, and I'll just chime in here for folks. Do not also forget to include young children in the census. I'll include the links to where you can complete the census form, as well as our website with information about counting young children too. So lastly, I think I don't see any more questions from the audience. So I think I'm going to end it with this question and allow our panelists to say their goodbyes. But before that, I just want to again say thank you and express my gratitude to Jeff, Olivia, Aiden, Christian, and Alexandra for being here and taking the time to speak with everyone who's joined us today. My question for all of you, or rather, the thing I'm asking you as you say your goodbyes is, what is the message you want people to walk away with right now? If there's one piece of information, what is it? And if you can provide any information or links so that way folks can reach out to you or your teams if you want to engage, if they want to engage with questions around these issues further after today. And I'll let Olivia start off with this.
I'm gonna cheat a tiny bit and do two things, but the first thing, right, making sure that you understand what your local elected officials and your state elected officials are doing, right? Because those are the policymakers that are making decisions that affect our everyday lives in very deep ways. And recognizing that our vote can actually go a long way in terms of our local and state elections. But I think the other key thing here is make a plan to vote. Really take that time, help your friends make a plan to vote, right? It can be difficult and confusing to register to vote, to learn how the process works. You all have this information, everyone who's here right now, and you should definitely take that and do what you can to register folks to vote. And again, you can always visit voting.nyc for literally any voting question that you might have. We've got it almost all on the website. And you know, if you have a specific question, feel free to reach out to me via email at obrady@nyccfb.info. Thank you so much for having me.
Jeff, I'll let you go next.
the beginning of the decade determines so much for a 10-year period. The census, redistricting, who funds what your community looks like. There's nothing more important than to get counted in the census, to vote, and if you can, get involved in the redistricting process, because it's all about who represents you, your family, your friends, and your neighbors. We can't revisit the census at this point once it's taken, and once the lines are drawn, they last for that 10-year period. So seize the opportunity, seize the moment now.
Thank you. And Alexandria, Christian, or Aiden, or all three of you, if you each have words to say.
I would say that the biggest takeaway from what I've heard from everybody is that you should take account of all these issues that are going on right now. There's so many, and really take this opportunity to vote on those issues, as opposed to just, I know protesting does a lot in and of itself, but voting is really the action after the protest that sends a message to the government of what specifically youth care about. And if the youth voting numbers increase, that generation of new voters will really make an impact in our government.
I also want to end on a message that's especially relevant today, how we're living in extraordinary times. We have a global health pandemic, we have rising racial tensions, we have economic inequality, we have climate change, and we can't really progress past the status quo if you don't vote. And I just want to expand on to what Alexandra said. Organizations like CCC help provide you tools and instruments to take more proactive measures, measures to educate and to encourage your peers. So I guess without you taking on that extra mindset, we can't really advance and we can't really spread our interests and make sure we're counted. And yeah, I just want to end on a note here that I just want to repeat again that we have a toolkit that we created, and it is especially important in today's current political climate, in today's status quo. It just makes all the voting information really accessible to you. And yeah, I'm just going to paste the toolkit link in the chat. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone. Olivia, Jeff, Aiden, Alexandra, Christian, I really appreciate your time, as well as the time that everyone took to join us here today. Whether you're listening on Facebook or joining us via Zoom, we'll make sure to follow up and provide you again with these links, some of the materials that our speakers and panelists shared. We'll be sure to include them in our follow-up communication with you. But thank you again for joining us today. We'll be in touch soon with more information as well as future events that we're having. October is already chock full of content that you're able to participate in. Remember, do not forget to register to vote, to complete your census, and stay up to date on what's going to be happening over the next couple of weeks and months. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.